Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Gear, and I'm an SE for Cisco Meraki. What I wanted to do today was to talk to you about cloud monitoring for Catalyst Wireless, right? So if you looked at my previous video for cloud monitoring for switching, the concepts are pretty much the same here, right? What we're doing is we're taking an on-premise 9800 series WLC, and we are using pre-existing iOS XE commands inside of iOS XE to take this device and the access points connected to it and registering this into the Meraki dashboard for monitoring them. So again, just as a recap, right, some of the benefits of that is that maybe you're a pre-existing Meraki customer, but you're in a hybrid environment, right? You have some Catalyst equipment, you have some Meraki equipment, and you're trying to cohesively get everything into the dashboard, right? For a single pane of glass to be able to get better analytics around your clients and what they're doing on in your network, and being able to look at the overall environment, right? The health of the environment, and being able to monitor not only what your clients are doing, but what your infrastructure is doing also, right? So with that being said, right, I figured what we would do this morning is go over some documentation, go over some hardware prerequisites and some requirements. We'll talk about iOS XE a little bit, and then we'll actually get an SSO pair of WLCs into the Meraki dashboard, and I'll show you what that onboarding process looks like. Okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And so the first thing that I want to talk about here, right, again, is the hardware requirements. Now, you'll see I have a couple tabs open on my browser here. I'll include all of these links in the description of the video so that you guys can go and review this also, because everybody's environment is a little bit different. So, you know, not one size fits all here. But with that being said, right, today, the wireless controllers that are supported is going to be any tangible wireless controller that, you know, I'm going to be able to put in my hand, right? So that's going to be the LC, the LF, the 40, or the 80, and the 9800 series flavor. If you have a 9800 CL, which is our cloud version, which is virtualized, right, runs in KVM or ESXi, that currently is not supported, right? So again, you need to have a tangible WLC in your environment for this to work successfully. Looking at the access points, we're going to support anything that's an AC Wave 2 or better, right? So you can see the list here. So again, anything that's an X8XX or better is going to be supported in the environment for onboarding and for monitoring. Going down to the iOS XE software, today, as of this video, right, what's available from download of the Cisco support website is going to be version 17.12.3, right? And so this is where things are a little bit different, right? I don't want to keep going back to my previous video, right? But when we did the Catalyst onboarding for our switches that we wanted to monitor, we actually had a separate application that we used, right, that logged into the switches and kind of created a conduit, if you will, between the switches and getting everything configured and up into the dashboard, right? And then that software client that we were running on our computer gracefully bowed out once we got things primed so that the switches could talk natively to the dashboard. And that's a little bit different here, right? With 17.12, we've included native support into the iOS XE to be able to actually run the commands natively from the iOS XE itself, right? So we don't need a little third-party shim, if you will. Well, not third-party, but a third component, a software shim, to, again, prime the switch and kind of get it up there. With the WLC in 17.12.3, we're actually going to run some native commands off of the WLC itself. So we don't need to download anything additional. We can just do it natively from the WLC. And as we go through this process this morning, you're going to be able to see that. Now, the last thing I wanted to point on or touch on real quick was the level of DNA licensing that you may have in your environment, right? And this is purely from a Catalyst perspective. So it breaks down into two license tiers, if you will, right? DNA Essentials or DNA E, and then DNA Advantage license or DNA A. And really, what's the difference between the two? It comes down to if you have analytics turned on for your clients. So forget about Meraki real quick, right? Let's just talk about the 9800 and those two licensing tiers. So if I have DNA E in my environment, I'm still going to be able to see clients connected to my network and things like that, right? And you're probably experiencing that today. But if I wanted to have application analytics around what those clients were doing, right? So being able to use IPN bar and leveraging the protocol packs that are on the WLC to be able to see where these clients are going, right? What their resolution is looking like, where, what websites are they hitting, what's the application breakdown, so on and so forth. That's a component of DNA Advantage licensing, right? So that kind of carries over into the Meraki dashboard, meaning that if you're on DNA E and you onboard your 9800, you're going to be in the equivalent of what you would see from a Catalyst perspective of clients connected. You're going to get all the RF telemetry, everything like that, right? Natively in Meraki, right? If we'll say I had a Meraki MR or a Meraki CW, right? We include the application scrubbing of the client natively, right? It's a portion of our subscription license. As you're onboarding a monitor-only mode WLC into the Meraki dashboard and you are using DNA E licensing, you're not going to see that application information, right? You need to be running DNA A licensing on the WLC, and then the dashboard will leverage, again, the protocol packs and leverage IPN bar so that you can see that application information in the dashboard, right? So just want to make sure that we're clear on that, if you will. And so again, in what I'm going to provide today, we're going to turn on all the features, if you will, right? We're going to talk about, we're going to turn on DNA A. We're going to program the WLC for DNA A so that the dashboard can leverage that information, right? And so the last thing that I wanted to point out real quick in the documentation is scale. I'll let you guys read the screen. And again, you can review this after the video. This link will be in the description. So just keep in mind the 2000 AP limit today. That's where we're sitting, right? That is going to be destined to grow, but that's where we're at right now, right? Okay, so let's talk about the prerequisites for connecting the WLC. So just like the other Catalyst monitoring, what we're doing is we're creating a tunnel inside of IOSXE to get this device up and registered to the dashboard. Now, it's a little bit different from switching because with switching, right, we have a switch that it's its own autonomous entity, if you will. And so we're only worried about the switch. But with Catalyst monitoring for wireless, right, not only are we looking at the WLC, but we're also looking at the access points that are connected to that WLC. So in the documentation, you can read through it, but you'll know that there's really two components here. What we're doing is we're onboarding the WLC natively into the Meraki dashboard via IOSXE, right? But the other thing that we're doing is we're having the access points do a one-time registration to the Meraki dashboard, right? So if you think about it and you're familiar with Meraki, you know that each piece of hardware has its own serial number. In the Catalyst wireless environment, that nomenclature is a cloud ID. And so the idea is that for every access point that is connected to the WLC and is supported in monitor-only mode based on that hardware list that we looked at, that access point needs to one time directly connect to the Meraki dashboard, right? So we have to be cognizant about how our network looks, and if we have ACLs in place or things like that from the access points perspective, because that is a requirement. What we need to do is we need to generate that cloud ID off of the access point, and then we need to provide that cloud ID to the dashboard so that we can allocate our communication between the dashboard and the WLC, where the WLC is saying, hey, I have, 200 access points, and here's what I see as registered, right? Versus the cloud ID and that access point actually being registered to the Meraki dashboard, right? So I hope that helps, but we need to have clarity around that, right? So the WLC has to have connectivity constantly to the Meraki dashboard. Your access points have to have a one-time connectivity for registration based on the cloud ID. If you add access points in the future, again, the process is the same, right? So if we think about it, that access point is going to join the WLC via your DHCP that you have. WLC is going to, send down new code to that access point, and the WLC is going to let that access point know, hey, by the way, we have cloud monitoring enabled here, so I need you to go register your cloud ID to the Meraki dashboard, right? So the access point is then going to go out, routed to the internet directly, and create that registration. And then at that point, everything becomes status quo for communication between the CAPWAP of the access point and then the WLC itself, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So with that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to actually jump in and start configuring the WLC. Everything in the environment can be done via the GUI. What I'm going to do today, because we're going to set up DNA-A, there is one command that needs to be run via CLI. So I'm just going to run everything from CLI, right? But let's talk about the tunnel real quick, right? So IP routing has to be enabled. The Meraki tunnel only supports the global VRF, right? And then from a programmability perspective, these are the requirements that we have to have enabled on our WLC. So I'm going to log into my WLC over here. And I'm going to validate that I have name resolution enabled and that my NTP is working correctly, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to validate that I am routing to the internet, right? So I'm going to ping 8.8.8.8. That's our Google DNS, right? And we have a successful result. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ping google.com to make sure that my DNS is correct, right? And I'm having good name resolution for my WLC, right? And then the next thing we need to validate is our NTP server. So we can do this a couple different ways, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just type in show NTP status, and I can see that my clock is synchronized, right? So I have good time from my WLC. Now, you probably have NTP set up, should be good. I just go over it because, sometimes we make changes in our environment. And sometimes from an infrastructure perspective, we sometimes forget to update maybe some settings that we have. And obviously, because this is wireless, your APs very much through DTLS, right, are expecting to have synchronized time. So I just go over it as a point, right? It's a requirement. Just make sure you have NTP set up correctly, because we are going to be leveraging that via the TLS to talk to the Meraki dashboard, right? Okay, so I've met all those requirements. Everything looks good there. Again, we're going to go through the CLI setup instead of the GUI. And so the first thing that we're going to do here from a CLI perspective is we're going to activate the process for Meraki Connect, right? So I'm going to go into configuration mode, and I'm going to type in service Meraki Connect. And so what that does is that spawns a daemon on the WLC to start to join itself to the Meraki dashboard, right? So if you think about monitoring for switches as it stands today, right, this is kind of where we were using that GUI client to talk to the switch and get the switch starting to talk to the dashboard, right? This is all native inside of the WLC now. So this process usually takes less than a minute, right? It's really quick. So what we can do at that point is we can then run the command show Meraki connect, and that's going to give us some output to make sure that we have a config fetch, that our tunnels are up, and just like a Meraki device, right? We have a primary tunnel and a backup tunnel. We want to make sure that both of those tunnels are up and operational. Otherwise, you may want to review your firewall settings. And then that process, right, also creates the cloud IDs that we're going to bring into the Meraki dashboard. So at this point, I'm going to show, sorry. So I ran the command show Meraki connect, and we can see that we were successful here. The fetch state is config fetch succeeded. Our tunnels are up and up on the primary and secondary, so that's great. And here are the cloud IDs that we are now going to take and put into our Meraki dashboard, right? So when we talk about that, right, I'm not going to go into extreme details, but just make sure that you're following the guidelines and the restrictions based on what we currently have today for wireless monitoring, right? And so, best practices is to have a separate network for your WLC, and you're going to want to join your WLC. You're going to want to claim your WLC into that network, right? So that's what we're going to do this morning. So again, because I have a good config fetch and my tunnels are up, everything looks good. I have 2 cloud IDs here. What I'm now going to do is go into my Meraki dashboard, and I'm going to claim these devices, right? So I'm going to just come back over here, and I'm going to grab this cloud ID, paste it into here. I'm going to grab my other cloud ID, paste it into here. And I'm going to claim those devices. So now you can see that the dashboard knows that this is a 9800 LC and another 9800 LC, right? So at this point, what I can do is I can actually take these 2 devices and put them into a network, right? Just like I would a Meraki device. So I'm going to grab these 2 guys, and I'm going to add them to a network. And so here is where we go through a little bit of a wizard. And you're going to see that that wizard is also going to be shown in the documentation. Again, from a lab purpose, I have a pre-existing network that I set up. It's just called WLC, right? So I'm going to choose that network, click Next. And so here's where you have an option, right? You have an option where if you are leveraging site tags in your environment, what the dashboard will do is it will look at the access points site tag, and it can on demand create a network nomenclature for each site tag, right? So I've created a network called WLC. Let's say I had a site tag called processing, right? A new network would be created for processing, and the access points would be put into that network, right? If you're not leveraging site tags, then at this point, from a logistics perspective, I call it a flat network, right? Or a flat nomenclature. Again, that's my own terminology. You're not going to read that anywhere. Just a flat topology or nomenclature, if you will, for where the access points are sitting, right? So if I choose that, that means that all of my access points are going to be in the WLC network, right? And so that's what we're going to do this morning. So I'm choosing an existing network called WLC, or I could create a new network if I wanted to, right? You can do that on the fly. I'm going to click Next. And so here, this is where we need to provide privilege 15 for our WLC and logging into it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. I agree to the terms. I'm going to click Next, and I'm going to click Confirm. So once I do that, what happens is that the WLCs get moved into the dashboard network. On the same essence, what's happening on the WLC's perspective is that the dashboard is now going to log into that WLC, and it's going to start programming the WLC so that it can start collecting telemetry on what's going on in the environment, right? Meaning, am I a single WLC? Am I an SSO WLC? How many access points do I have? What are their models? So on and so forth, right? And so right now, if you look, right, you can see that by default, this looks like a Meraki layout for wireless, right? But after I joined the 9800s, claimed them and joined them to a network, I'm going to go ahead and refresh my dashboard here. You now see that that updates to a wireless LAN controller. And what I can do is click on list here. And when I click on list, what it's going to provide is those two devices that I claimed, right, in my inventory and that I then moved to the network. If I click on the primary WLC, you're going to see that I'm going to get a banner that says onboarding is still in progress, right? So what it's doing is it's talking to the WLC. If I'm in SSO mode, it's also getting some information based on the primary WLC, and it's going to start building everything out. So at this point, it's a good idea to let this process run before we do anything else. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and wait for my onboarding to complete. And then we're going to go ahead and continue our next steps here. So I'm going to pause the video and I'll see you guys in a couple minutes. Okay, guys, so we are back. So now we are looking at, well, previously, right before I paused the video, right, we were waiting for the onboarding process to happen into the Meraki dashboard from the WLC. So what I'm looking at right now, right, is that blue banner went away, and this is now the WLC in the Meraki dashboard. So from the perspective, right, you can see that we brought over the host name for this device. We are allocating it as monitor only, right? We are bringing in typical Meraki fashion, the IP addressing, things like that. We can see our serial numbers. If I come over here, if you are in SSO, you're going to be able to see your chassis, right? In my environment, I don't have RMI enabled. I just used RP. I know that's a best practice to use RMI plus RP. So if you did have RMI enabled, you would see that information right here, right? And then we look at our APs themselves. We can see that our APs have onboarded into the environment. Now, that was a pretty quick process, right? But I only have 3 APs. So you may have discrepancies in your environment, right? It may take you a little bit longer than just 5 minutes to get everything onboarded into the environment. But while that's happening, right, there is no outage. There's nothing going on from the perspective of your wireless environment. All we're doing is we're just, again, read-only collecting information from your environment and bringing it up into the dashboard, right? So, it's recommended that you would want to do this in a low usage time, because I'm sure CPU utilization is going to go up. We're going to take a little more memory based on the processes that are running on the WLC to do this, right? But with that being said, we're not bringing any wireless components down. We're not shutting any interfaces down. We're not doing anything like that, right? So just for what it's worth, right? Now, the one thing that I did not mention, and shame on me for not talking about it earlier, was from the wireless controller prerequisite perspective, we do need to have AAA new model enabled on the WLC, right? And so I don't want to get into a deep discussion on AAA. But out of the box, right, when you set up a WLC, you get the GUI, right? You're logging into the GUI. You can do firmware upgrades from the GUI. You can do pretty much everything from the GUI, right? So you may not have enabled AAA new model. If you weren't using or are not using a Radius server in your environment, you're just using PSK everywhere, you definitely don't have AAA new model enabled, right? So this is a command that you do have to have on the WLC before you go through the onboarding process that I talked about earlier, right? You have to have AAA new model. If you don't have SSH access enabled, that's also something that you have to turn on the WLC. And by default, when you enable SSH access, right, you have to add some additional commands to the AAA new model. And so that gives you SSH access. But that doesn't give you all the access on the WLC, right? You have SSH access, but when you enable SSH access, you now have turned your console access into an error in authentication, right? So, and again, this is out of the box, right? If you have already set up your environment, you got all this set up, right? Don't worry about it, right? You're good to go. We're just looking for AAA new model. But if you've never used AAA new model, I'll include in the description some lines of code that you can use that will enable SSH access on the WLC and also enable console access again for the WLC, because otherwise what will happen is that you'll have SSH access, but then you won't be able to access the console, right? So you need to have these commands under AAA new model for everything, right? And then that will give you console access in case you lose IP connectivity, right? We still want to be able to get to that console one way or the other. And so those commands will allow you to do that. So the AAA new model is needed, right? Because what we're doing is we're actually creating two Meraki users in the WLC to be able to log in and to be able to get that telemetry and information out of the WLC. All right. So moving on. So now we have our access points. We have the WLC. Things are showing up in SSO mode. If I go over to my wireless here and I look at my access points, I can see some APs that have shown up. I got the model of them. Looks very familiar to a Meraki wireless environment, right? The one thing that I wanted to point out is for anything that gets onboarded into the environment, like for example, when I look at my WLC here, the hostname gets imported over, but setting the location for devices is now something that you have to do, right? So just like the Meraki access points, when you bring a new Meraki access point on to the dashboard, you have to provide a physical address for each of those devices, right? And so, you know, shameless plug here, there's going to be another video for the CMDS that is going to automate this process that we're doing here. But what it also allows you to do is set the physical address location for not only your WLC, but every last access point that's in your environment that you've onboarded for wireless monitoring, right? So just keep that in mind. If you need a way to automate your physical address location for your WLC and your access points, CMDS will be able to do that for you, right? Okay, so we're looking good. Access points are up, WLC is up, things are good. Now, at this point, we need to take a look at AVC, right? And so again, if you have the license level of DNA A on your WLC and you want to turn on traffic analysis and analytics, then this is the next step that we would have to go through to get that up and running, right? And so this component is client disrupting because what we need to do is we need to actually shut down the wireless profile, add some flow control statements, associate the flow control statements, and then bring the wireless profile back up, right? And so when I'm talking about the wireless profile, that's separate from the WLAN itself. This is the wireless profile where we're looking at, you know, is this, you know, have we enabled QoS? Are we using CapWAP or Flex? What's our network, our VLAN that we're using for this WLAN, right? That's where we're associating the WLAN to the back-end requirements, if you will, right, of that SSID, right? So with that being said, again, I'm going to do this via CLI because there is one requirement here that is CLI only for the AVC enablement. And what I did is I created a little bit of a cheat sheet over here for creating my flow exporters and then my wireless policy, right? Just to make the video a little bit quicker, because I know I've already rambled more than enough. So we'll get you guys out of here very soon. Okay, so let's talk about AVC. So this is where we want to, again, be able to see application visibility from a client perspective. And again, the requirement for that is to have DNA A licensing on our WLC. If you have DNA E licensing on your WLC, I appreciate your time and thank you for hanging out today and going through the process. But for you guys, you're done. I hope you have a great day, right? For those of us that have DNA A licensing and we want to turn on AVC, this is the final step that we need to go through on the WLC to get everything up and running, right? So looking at our documentation here, right? What we need to do is we need to shut down the policy profile, right? And so when we shut that down and we re-enable it, just so you know, right, we're not actually shutting down, we're not making the access point reboot when we bring the profile back up. What we're doing is the access point has to rejoin, right? So the software stays up and running. We're not doing a warm boot, if you will, on the access point. We're just via the software stack, bringing it down and then bringing it back up. So it could be service disruptive, right? But it's not like having to reboot an access point, waiting for the operating system on the access point to come back up and then register back to the WLC. Should be a fairly quick rejoin after we've done this, right? But while we have the profile down and we're making our changes, obviously we're going to be affecting clients from that perspective. So with that being said, let's take a look at what we need to do here, right? So we need to shut down the wireless profile policy and we need to add some components. In addition to that, we also need to create a wireless local exporter and then create some flow statements and then bind that all together. So what I'm going to do over here is I am going to take my cheat sheet. And so the very first thing that we need to do is create our flow exporter. And so this should not be disruptive to your environment, right? I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to log back into my WLC. And I'm going to go into configuration mode. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste my cheat sheet in there, right? So what I've done is I've created the local exporter. I've set the destination for it. I have created my flow monitor, my caching, and my exporter, my cache timeout, and my IPv6, right? Now, over on my wireless policy, this is where I bind it all together, right? So if I exit out of here, the very first thing I need to do is take a look at the profiles that I want to update, right? So what I can do is I can do show, wireless profile policy. Wireless profile policy. And I could do just the summary if I wanted to. And so on this WLC, right, I have one policy. It's the default policy. In your guys' environment, right, you have multiple SSIDs. You've bound multiple WLAN IDs to profiles based on what you needed, right? So you're probably going to have a decent list. But in my environment, since it's the lab, I have one, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the wireless profile policy at this point. And I'm going to cheat over here. Put this right here. And so we need to shut it down, right? And then we'll add our discovery and our flow monitors. And down here at the bottom are DHCP TLV caching and our HTTP TLV caching. That is equivalent to our device classification that we have in the documentation for the web UI, right? But the way that I look at it is the path of least resistance. You have to use the CLI over here, right? So we might as well just do everything via the CLI. All right, so let me grab this guy. All right, and I'm going to shut it down. And you can see here that we're disabling the policy will result in associated AP client rejoin. And now I'm going to add my associations here. And then I'm just going to type in no show, right? And so that brings the policy back up. So now if I look at my WLC, from a documentation perspective, right, when we're talking about AVC, from the GUI perspective, we'll go ahead and just double check this stuff to make sure it looks good, right? So if I go to configuration, tags and profiles policy, look at my default policy profile, you can see that we now have the check mark for HTTP TLV and DHCP TLV caching, right? We added that. And then from the perspective of coming up here and looking at our AVC, if we go to configuration services and application visibility, we can then look at the default policy profile and see that that is enabled. And our collector address was local, which was the WLC statements that we had over here, right? So this has nothing to do with the name of the device or anything like that, right? We're just doing, we're creating a flow explorer and we're creating a destination local WLC, right? So at this point, we are successful in creating AVC. So when your clients are connecting to the WLC at this point, if this had already been enabled in your environment from a WLC perspective, obviously you would want to review the requirements on the Meraki side to make sure you're meeting all of them. But if you did not have this turned on and you had DNAA licensing, right, this again is the component that's going to allow your clients to join the access point, and when it starts going out to the internet or leveraging resources locally on your network, the WLC is going to take this information and share it with the Meraki dashboard so that we can then see AVC and telemetry information for the client. So most importantly here, right, once we have all of this work done, I'm going to write that and save it to memory on the WLC. So that's really it, guys. We have successfully onboarded a WLC into the Meraki dashboard. We got the network set up. Our APs are online. We can see them in the list here. And again, right, in your environment, you would not be able to see the physical address of any of these devices yet. That's something that you would have to add manually. But if you want to use CMDS for that, there is now a module that will allow you to onboard the WLC and set the physical address for all of your access points or your WLC and or choice access points, right? So you can pick and choose what APs you want to put in one physical location. But with that being said, guys, we're up and running. Things are looking good. And so I do appreciate your time today. I will include all the resources that we've discussed this morning in the description of the video. And otherwise, I hope you have a great morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're watching this video. So take care and definitely come back for more videos. Thank you.